Don't play the veteran game. It's just a piece of metal.
I lost my Purple Heart. Please help me find it.
Cop said, "Stop playing the vet card." 6 minutes later, veterans in uniform walked into his station. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Fairview Police Department as 66-year-old Arthur Miller walked slowly toward the entrance, his weathered hands clutching a manila folder containing the only evidence of the break-in that had shattered his quiet retirement. The folder held photos of his ransacked bedroom, an inventory of stolen items, and most importantly, documentation of his military service proof that the small bronze medal with the purple ribbon that had been taken from his dresser was no ordinary piece of jewelry. Arthur had served 18 years as a combat medic in the U.S. Army, earning his Purple Heart in Beirut in 1983, when shrapnel from a car bomb had torn through his left shoulder while he was treating wounded Marines. The medal represented more than personal recognition. It symbolized the 7 lives he had saved that day, the trust his fellow soldiers had placed in him, and the sacrifice that had defined his adult life. Since his wife Sarah's death 3 years earlier, the Purple Heart had become Arthur's most treasured possession, a tangible connection to the man he had been and the purpose that had driven him through decades of service. Now, it was gone, stolen along with his wedding ring and a few $100s in cash by someone who had broken into his modest home on Elm Street. Officer Daniel Hayes, 28 years old and 3 years into his law enforcement career, looked up from his computer with barely concealed irritation as Arthur approached the front desk. Hayes had already handled 2 domestic disturbance calls and a fender bender that morning, and the last thing he wanted to deal with was another elderly resident complaining about a minor burglary. "Can I help you?" Hayes asked, his tone suggesting that helping was the last thing he wanted to do. "I need to report a theft," Arthur said quietly, setting his folder on the counter. "Someone broke into my home yesterday and took several items, including my Purple Heart medal." Hayes glanced at the folder without opening it. "Purple Heart, huh? Let me guess you want us to drop everything and launch a manhunt for your costume jewelry?" Arthur felt his chest tighten at the dismissive tone, but he maintained his composure. "Officer, I understand you have many cases to handle, but this medal has significant personal and historical value. I earned it in Beirut in 1983 while serving as a combat medic." "Right," Hayes said finally, opening the folder and scanning the contents with obvious disinterest. "Look, Mr. Miller, I'm sure this trinket means a lot to you, but we've got real crimes to solve here." Arthur's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a faded photograph from his folder, a picture of himself in dress uniform, the Purple Heart pinned to his chest, standing beside 7 Marines whose lives he had saved in Beirut. "Officer Hayes, this isn't just a trinket. This medal represents—" "Stop right there!" Hayes interrupted, his voice rising with frustration. "I've heard this sob story 100 times. Every old-timer who loses something thinks their military service makes them special. You want to file a report? Fine. But stop playing the vet card like it's going to make me care more about your missing jewelry." The words hit Arthur like a physical blow. In all his years since leaving the military, through all the challenges of civilian life, no one had ever dismissed his service so callously. He stood in stunned silence as Hayes continued typing, treating the theft of Arthur's most precious possession as nothing more than routine paperwork. "The Purple Heart isn't just jewelry," Arthur said quietly, his voice barely audible. "It's awarded to those wounded or killed in service to their country. I was treating wounded Marines when a car bomb exploded 50 feet away. The shrapnel that earned me this medal also—" "Look, Grandpa." Hayes cut him off again, his patience completely exhausted. "I don't need a history lesson. You lost some stuff in a burglary. I'll file the report, and if we happen to catch the guy, maybe you'll get your things back. But don't expect miracles just because you got some old war stories." Arthur felt something break inside him, not just disappointment, but a profound sense of betrayal. He had spent nearly 2 decades serving his country, had bled for it, had saved lives in its name. And now, when he needed help from the very system he had sworn to protect, he was being treated like a nuisance. "I understand," Arthur said finally, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. "Thank you for your time, Officer Hayes." As Arthur left the police station, Hayes shook his head and muttered to his partner, Officer Jennifer Walsh, who had been listening to the exchange with growing discomfort. "These old vets think the world owes them something. Guy probably lost his medal years ago and just wants attention." Walsh, whose own grandfather had served in Vietnam, felt her stomach turn at Hayes's callousness. "Daniel, maybe you should what pretend that every sob story deserves special treatment? This is police work, not a therapy session." Meanwhile, Arthur drove home in silence, feeling more violated by Officer Hayes's attitude than he had by the burglary itself. The thief had taken his possessions, but Hayes had taken something more precious, his dignity, and the respect he thought his service had earned. Arthur's neighbor, retired Air Force Master Sergeant Brenda Sanchez, was working in her garden when she saw him return. The 58-year-old veteran had known Arthur for 5 years, ever since moving to Fairview after her own retirement, and she immediately recognized the signs of distress in his posture. "Arthur, how did it go at the police station?" she called out, setting down her pruning shears. Arthur paused at his front door, his shoulders sagging with defeat. "They took the report," he said simply, but Brenda heard the pain in his voice. "That's all? What about your Purple Heart?" Arthur's silence was answer enough. Brenda felt her own military training kick in the protective instinct that had made her an effective leader during her 22 years of service. She had seen too many veterans dismissed and disrespected by people who had never worn the uniform, never understood the sacrifice that military service required. "Arthur, tell me exactly what happened in there." As Arthur recounted his experience with Officer Hayes, Brenda's expression grew increasingly grim. She had dealt with bureaucratic indifference during her military career, but the blatant disrespect Hayes had shown toward a Purple Heart recipient was beyond anything she had encountered. "He said what?" Brenda asked, her voice dangerously quiet, when Arthur repeated Hayes's vet card comment. "He called it costume jewelry, Brenda. Said I was just looking for attention with my old war stories." Arthur's voice cracked slightly as he relived the humiliation. Brenda felt her anger building, not the hot, explosive rage of youth, but the cold, calculated fury of a senior non-commissioned officer who had spent decades protecting her subordinates from exactly this kind of treatment. She had not risen to the rank of Master Sergeant by accepting disrespect toward those under her command, and she wasn't about to start now. "Arthur, go inside and rest. I'm going to make some phone calls." Within 30 minutes, Brenda had contacted 12 veterans living in and around Fairview. Her network included retired officers and enlisted personnel from all branches of servicemen and women who had served in conflicts from Vietnam to Afghanistan. Each call began the same way: "We have a situation that requires immediate attention." The first person she called was Lieutenant Colonel Emily Chen, a retired Army officer who now worked as a veterans advocate in the state capital. Chen had served 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan and had earned her own Purple Heart during a convoy attack in Fallujah. "Brenda, what's the situation?" Chen asked, immediately recognizing the urgency in her friend's voice. A Purple Heart recipient was just humiliated by a police officer who told him to stop playing the vet card. The officer dismissed his medal as costume jewelry and refused to take the theft seriously. Chen's response was immediate and decisive. "I'll be there tomorrow morning. How many others can you mobilize? Give me 2 hours and I'll have a count." Brenda's next call was to Sergeant Major Robert Jackson, a 30-year Army veteran who had served in Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Jackson's deep voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect on battlefields around the world. "Master Sergeant Sanchez, what do you need?" "We need to remind some people what respect looks like, Sergeant Major." "I'll be there. Full dress uniform?" "Absolutely. We're going to do this by the book." The calls continued throughout the afternoon. Chief Petty Officer Maria Rodriguez, who had served on 3 Navy deployments. Staff Sergeant David Kim, a Marine Corps veteran with 2 Purple Hearts of his own. Captain Sarah Williams, an Air Force pilot who had flown combat missions over Afghanistan. Each veteran Brenda contacted understood immediately what was at stake. This wasn't just about Arthur's stolen medal. It was about the fundamental respect owed to those who had served their country. Officer Hayes's dismissive attitude represented a broader problem that many veterans faced when dealing with civilian institutions that didn't understand or value military service. By evening, Brenda had confirmed attendance from 25 veterans representing all branches of the military. The plan was simple but powerful. They would arrive at the Fairview Police Department the next morning in full dress uniform, presenting a united front that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. "We're not going there to cause trouble," Brenda explained to each participant. "We're going to demonstrate what respect and professionalism look like. We're going to remind them that veterans deserve better than what Arthur received." Lieutenant Colonel Chen arrived in Fairview that evening, driving 3 hours from the state capital to participate in what she was already calling Operation Respect. She met with Brenda and Arthur to review the plan and ensure that their demonstration would be both effective and appropriate. "Arthur, I want you to understand something," Chen said as they sat in his living room. "What happened to you today was unacceptable. No veteran should ever be told to stop playing the vet card when seeking help from the very institutions they swore to protect." Arthur, who had been feeling increasingly isolated since his encounter with Hayes, was overwhelmed by the support he was receiving. "I never expected anything like this. I just wanted my medal back." "And you'll get it back," Chen assured him. "But more importantly, we're going to make sure this never happens to another veteran in this town." As word of the planned demonstration spread through the veteran community, additional supporters began arriving in Fairview. Some came from neighboring towns, others from across the state. All were united by a common purpose to stand up for one of their own and to demand the respect that their service had earned. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the character of both the police department and the community it served. On 800 hours, Sharp Lieutenant Colonel Emily Chen led a formation of 25 veterans up the steps of the Fairview Police Department. Their dress uniforms were immaculate, their bearing professional, and their purpose unmistakable. The sight of so many decorated service members moving in perfect formation drew immediate attention from everyone in the vicinity. Officer Hayes was at the front desk when the formation entered the lobby. His casual morning routine was shattered as he found himself facing a wall of military precision and barely contained authority. The veterans arranged themselves in two ranks with Chen at the front and Sergeant Major Jackson at her right shoulder. "Good morning," Chen said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to command. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Emily Chen, United States Army, retired. We're here regarding the case of Arthur Miller and the theft of his Purple Heart medal." Hayes felt his mouth go dry as he looked at the assembled veterans. Their uniform ribbons told stories of service in conflicts he had only read about, and their collective presence filled the small lobby with an energy that was both respectful and intimidating. I handled that case yesterday." Hayes stammered, suddenly aware that his dismissive treatment of Arthur was about to come under scrutiny. "Yes, we know," Chen replied. "We understand that Mr. Miller was told to stop playing the vet card, and that his Purple Heart was dismissed as costume jewelry. We're here to discuss the appropriate level of respect and attention that should be given to crimes against veterans." The lobby had fallen completely silent, except for the sound of Hayes's increasingly rapid breathing. Other officers had begun to gather, drawn by the unprecedented sight of so many veterans in their station. Sergeant Major Jackson stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Officer Hayes, do you understand what a Purple Heart represents?" It's a military medal," Hayes replied weakly. "It's awarded to those wounded or killed in service to their country." Jackson explained, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of military experience. "Arthur Miller earned his Purple Heart in Beirut in 1983, while saving the lives of 7 Marines. The shrapnel that wounded him was the price he paid for putting others before himself." Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez added her voice to the explanation. "When a Purple Heart is stolen, it's not just theft of property. It's theft of honor sacrifice and the blood that was shed earning it." Hayes looked around, desperately realizing that his casual dismissal of Arthur's case had escalated into a crisis that was far beyond his ability to handle. The veterans weren't angry or aggressive, but their professional demeanor somehow made their disapproval more intimidating than any shouting match could have been. "Where is your supervisor?" Chen asked politely. "We'd like to discuss how this case will be prioritized and what steps will be taken to ensure that veterans receive appropriate respect in future interactions." Before Hayes could answer, Chief David White emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion in his lobby. The 20-year police veteran took one look at the assembled formation and immediately understood that his department was facing a public relations crisis of significant proportions. "I'm Chief White," he announced, approaching Chen with the respect due to her rank. "Lieutenant Colonel, what can I do for you?" Chen handed him a folder containing documentation of Arthur's case, along with witness statements from other veterans who had experienced similar dismissive treatment from various officers. "Chief White, We're here to discuss the systemic disrespect that veterans have been experiencing from your department, specifically regarding the case of Arthur Miller's stolen Purple Heart. Chief White reviewed the documents quickly, his expression growing more serious with each page. He had served in the National Guard himself and understood both the significance of military service and the political implications of the situation he was facing. "Officer Hayes," Chief White said, his voice carrying unmistakable authority, "report to my office immediately." As Hayes hurried away, Chief White turned back to the veterans. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen, I want to personally apologize for the treatment Mr. Miller received. This is not representative of our department's values, and I assure you that immediate corrective action will be taken." "We appreciate that, Chief," Chen replied. "But we're not just here for apologies. We want to see concrete changes that ensure this never happens again." The crisis had reached its peak, and everyone present understood that the next few minutes would determine whether this confrontation would end in resolution or escalation. Chief White quickly assessed the situation and made a decision that would define his leadership and his department's relationship with the veteran community. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen, would you and your representatives join me in the conference room? I want to address this matter properly." The conference room filled with the quiet authority of experienced military personnel as Chen Jackson Rodriguez and 3 other senior veterans took seats around the table. Chief White was joined by Detective Sophia Lee, a 12-year department veteran who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining law enforcement. "First, let me be clear about something," Chief White began. "Officer Hayes' treatment of Mr. Miller was completely unacceptable and does not represent the values of this department. Detective Lee, I'm assigning you to take personal charge of Mr. Miller's case effective immediately." Detective Lee nodded professionally. "Chief, I've already reviewed the initial report. With your permission, I'd like to expand the investigation and treat this as a priority case." "Granted. Whatever resources you need." Chen leaned forward slightly. "Chief White, we appreciate the immediate response, but we need to discuss the broader issue. This isn't an isolated incident. Several veterans in this community have reported similar dismissive treatment when seeking help from your department." Sergeant Major Jackson opened a folder he had brought. "We've documented 6 separate incidents over the past 2 years where veterans were told their military service was irrelevant to their cases or where their concerns were dismissed because of their veteran status." Chief White felt his stomach sink as he realized the scope of the problem. "I was not aware of these incidents. Why weren't they reported through proper channels?" "Because veterans are taught to handle problems internally," Rodriguez explained. "We don't typically complain unless the situation becomes intolerable. Arthur's case was the breaking point." The climactic moment came when Chief White made a decision that would transform his department's approach to veteran affairs. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen, I want to propose something unprecedented. Would you and your organization be willing to work with us to develop a comprehensive training program for all our officers on veteran affairs and military culture?" Chen exchanged glances with Jackson before responding. "Chief, we'd be honored to help, but we need to see immediate action on Arthur's case first. Trust must be earned through results, not promises." "Understood. Detective Lee, what's your assessment of the investigation potential?" Lee had been reviewing the case file during the meeting. "Chief, The theft occurred in broad daylight in a neighborhood with several security cameras. The perpetrator also took items that can be traced. With proper priority and resources, I believe we can solve this case within 48 hours. Make it happen, whatever you need. As the meeting continued, Officer Hayes sat in Chief White's office, his career hanging in the balance. The young officer was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake, not just in how he had treated Arthur, but in his fundamental misunderstanding of what military service meant to those who had worn the uniform. The climax of the confrontation came when Arthur Miller himself arrived at the police station, having been contacted by Brenda Sanchez about the veterans' demonstration. He walked into a lobby still filled with uniformed veterans who immediately came to attention as he entered. "Mr. Miller," Chen said, approaching him with the respect due to a fellow Purple Heart recipient. "We're here to ensure that your case receives the attention it deserves and that you receive the respect you've earned." Arthur, overwhelmed by the support, struggled to find words. "I never expected. I just wanted my medal back." "And you'll get it back," Jackson assured him. "But more importantly, we're making sure this never happens to another veteran." Chief White emerged from the conference room and approached Arthur directly. "Mr. Miller, I want to personally apologize for Officer Hayes' treatment of you yesterday. It was unprofessional, disrespectful, and completely contrary to our department's values." "I appreciate that, Chief," Arthur replied quietly. "Sir, I'm assigning Detective Lee, one of our best investigators and a combat veteran herself, to personally handle your case. She has full authority to use whatever resources necessary to recover your Purple Heart and apprehend the person responsible." Detective Lee stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, I served in Afghanistan and I understand what that medal means. I give you my word that we will find it." The climactic resolution came when Chief White made a public announcement to the assembled veterans. Effective immediately, Officer Hayes is being transferred to administrative duties pending a full review of his conduct. Additionally, this department will be implementing mandatory training on veteran affairs for all personnel developed in partnership with your organization. Chen nodded approvingly. "Chief White, we accept your proposal for partnership, but we want regular progress reports and accountability measures. You'll have them. And Mr. Miller, I want you to know that you have my personal phone number. If you ever feel that you're not receiving appropriate respect from any member of this department, you call me directly." As the veterans began to file out of the station, their mission accomplished, Arthur found himself surrounded by men and women who understood his service and respected his sacrifice. For the first time since his Purple Heart was stolen, he felt that justice was possible. The demonstration had lasted exactly 6 minutes from entry to resolution, but its impact would be felt for years to come. The veterans had proven that their community would not tolerate disrespect toward those who had served, and the police department had learned that military service deserved recognition and honor, not dismissal. As Chen led the formation out of the building, she turned back to Chief White. "Chief, we look forward to working with you, but remember, trust is earned through actions, not words." 48 hours after the veterans' demonstration, Detective Sophia Lee called Arthur Miller with news that brought tears to his eyes. "Mr. Miller, we've recovered your Purple Heart. The suspect has been arrested and your medal is safe." The investigation had moved with unprecedented speed and efficiency. Security camera footage from the neighborhood had identified the perpetrator, and Detective Lee's thorough investigation had led to the recovery of not only Arthur's Purple Heart, but also medals stolen from 3 other veterans in the region. Chief White personally returned the Purple Heart to Arthur in a ceremony attended by Lieutenant Colonel Chen and the veterans who had stood up for him. "Mr. Miller, it's my honor to return this to you," Chief White said as he placed the medal in Arthur's trembling hands. "And I want you to know that this department will always treat your service with the respect it deserves." Officer Hayes had been transferred to a different department after completing mandatory training on veteran affairs and military culture. His replacement officer, Maria Santos, was herself a Navy veteran who understood the significance of military service and the respect owed to those who had worn the uniform. The partnership between the police department and the veteran community had yielded remarkable results. The comprehensive training program developed by Chen's team had been implemented not only in Fairview, but in police departments across the state. The program focused on understanding military culture, recognizing the unique challenges faced by veterans, and providing appropriate respect and support. Arthur's case had become a catalyst for broader change. The local media coverage had inspired other communities to examine their own treatment of veterans, and several cities had implemented similar training programs for their first responders. Most importantly for Arthur, he had discovered a community he never knew existed. The veterans who had stood up for him had become close friends, and he now volunteered with Chen's organization to help other veterans navigate civilian bureaucracy and ensure they received appropriate respect and support. "I lost my medal for 2 days," Arthur reflected during a veterans gathering 6 months later, "but I gained a family that will last the rest of my life." The Purple Heart once again sat in its place of honor in Arthur's bedroom, but now it represented more than just his own service. It symbolized the unbreakable bonds between those who had served and their commitment to protecting each other long after their military service had ended. This story demonstrates how the veteran community's solidarity can create positive change and ensure that military service receives the respect and recognition it deserves.